Chapter 31. The rhythmic thud of the drilling rig was the only sound cutting through the still night air, that is, until the approaching clatter of horses' hooves shattered the peace. The camp fell silent as 5 riders emerged from the darkness. Led by a grizzled man wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a worn leather duster, his rifle was slung across his back, and his eyes were sharp as they surveyed the scene before him. Matthew's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his expression neutral. Dalton, on the other hand, calmly finished his sip of coffee before stepping forward. The sheriff dismounted with the fluidity of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. His boots hit the dusty ground with a soft thud, and the men around the camp froze. Eyes warily fixed on him, the sheriff's eyes swept over the tents, the drilling rig, and finally rested on Dalton and Matthew standing near the campfire. "You the ones running this here operation?" the sheriff asked, his voice gravelly from years of barking orders. Dalton stepped forward, tipping his hat slightly. "That's right. Name's Dalton, and this hay race, Mr. Hesh," he said, gesturing toward Matthew. "We're drilling for oil." The sheriff's eyes flicked toward Matthew, then back to Dalton. "I see," he said slowly. "Well, I've been hearing some talk in town about a new drilling site out here, so I came to check it out myself. You boys got the proper permits and licenses to be digging around these parts?" Dalton crossed his arms, leaning casually against one of the crates stacked nearby. "Sheriff, as I'm sure you're aware, the law in these parts says that a permit isn't required until we confirm the presence of a steady oil flow," Dalton said smoothly, "and so far, we've only hit Trecesno's steady stream yet, so, by the book, we're in the clear." The sheriff squinted at Dalton, clearly not satisfied with the answer. "Is that right? Seems like a convenient interpretation of the law to me." Dalton shrugged nonchalantly. "It's all in the legal code, Sheriff. We've done our homework. Until we hit a productive well, no permits are necessary. We're just exploring for now." The sheriff looked over his shoulder at the 4 men who had ridden with him, all of whom were still mounted, rifles resting casually across their laps. He turned back to Dalton and Matthew, eyes narrowing. "I don't like troublemakers in my town," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "If I find out you're breaking any laws or stirring up trouble, I'll be back, and next time, it won't just be a friendly visit." Matthew could feel a bead of sweat trickling down his temple, but he stayed silent, letting Dalton handle the conversation. He had to trust that Dalton knew the local laws well enough to keep them out of trouble for now. Dalton held the sheriff's gaze, unflinching. "No trouble here, Sheriff. We're just honest men trying to strike it rich, same as anyone else in this godforsaken land." For a moment, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then the sheriff finally nodded, albeit reluctantly. "All right, Dalton, but he'll be keeping an eye on you and your crew. One wrong step and he'll shut you down faster than you can say oil well." With that, the sheriff turned on his heel, whistling sharply for his men. The riders tugged at their reins, turning their horses back toward town. The sheriff mounted up with one smooth motion, casting one last, lingering look at the drilling site before leading his posse away. As the sound of hooves faded into the night, Dalton let out a breath he had been holding. He turned to Matthew, a sly grin spreading across his weathered face. "Well, that went better than I expected," Dalton said, brushing some dust off his coat. Matthew, still trying to process the encounter, turned to him with a puzzled look. "Is it a normal occurrence here? Sheriff's coming by to check in on drilling operations." "You could say so, but that is not a big deal. We should focus on drilling." April 9, 1881. Late afternoon, a dry wind swept through the camp, carrying with it a fine dust that clung to everything. The men moved sluggishly, their spirits low as supplies dwindled. It had been nearly a week since the sheriff's visit, and the tension in the camp had only grown. Matthew leaned against the side of his tent, watching Dalton's crew struggle to keep the drilling rig running. The sound of the walking beam creaking and the steam engine hissing was a familiar background noise. But today it seemed almost forlorn, like the last gasps of a dying beast. They were on their last barrels of water, and the food was running dangerously low. The men were tired, sunburned, and on the edge of mutiny. Matthew could see it in their eye, the unspoken question of whether all this effort was worth it. Doubt had taken root, and it was spreading fast, but Dalton was relentless. He drove the men hard, pushing them to keep drilling, even as their bodies begged for rest. He knew, just as Matthew did, that they were on the verge of either a breakthrough or complete disaster. There was no in-between. Dalton stood by the derrick, his eyes fixed on the rhythmic rise and fall of the cable tool. He had been monitoring the drilling depth closely for hours, not even taking a break to eat. The men working the rig were exhausted, their shirts soaked with sweat, their hands raw from gripping the mud pump handles. "Keep her steady, boys," Dalton barked, his voice hoarse from shouting over the noise. "We're almost there. I can feel it." Matthew, standing beside Dalton, they were at nearly 1,200 feet the depth where he believed they would strike oil, but the ground had grown harder and the rate of penetration had slowed to a crawl. It was taking hours just to gain a few more feet. Suddenly, there was a change in the sound. A low, hollow thud echoed up from the depths of the borehole, different from the dull impact they had grown used to. Dalton's eyes widened. "Hold up. Stop the drill," he shouted. The crew quickly brought the walking beam to a halt. The men on the mud pump let out a collective sigh of relief, their arms trembling from the effort. Dalton leaned over the borehole, listening intently, his face tense. "What is it?" Matthew asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dalton raised a hand to silence him, his ears still turned toward the hole. Then, with a sudden, wild grin, he turned to Matthew. "I think we hit it." The men around the rig froze, every eye turned toward the derrick. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind and the soft creak of the wooden structure. Then, a faint gurgling noise began to rise from the depths of the borehole. "Quick, get the bailer up." Dalton barked. The men scrambled into action, cranking the winch to pull up the heavy steel cylinder used to extract debris from the well. Every second felt like an eternity as they waited, the air thick with anticipation as the bailer emerged from the hole. Droplets of dark, viscous liquid dripped from its sides. The men pulled it over to a pan and carefully tipped it, emptying its contents. A cheer erupted as thick, black crude oil pooled in the metal pan, the unmistakable scent of hydrocarbons filling the air. "We've got oil." Jennings, the burly worker, shouted, pumping his fist into the air. Dalton clapped Matthew on the back, nearly knocking the wind out of him. "You did it, Hesh. You were right all along." Matthew stared at the glistening pool of oil, unable to believe his eyes. After weeks of drilling, facing down the sheriff, and nearly running out of supplies, they had finally struck it rich. Chapter 32. A day later, in the morning, Matthew stood by the derrick, watching as Dalton's men moved quickly, preparing for the next phase. The initial cheer of finding oil had been replaced by a determined urgency. They had hit the reservoir, but now the real work began. Extracting the crude and turning this discovery into profit. Dalton barked orders, his voice carrying over the camp. "All right, boys. We've struck it, but we're far from done. We need to set up the extraction pumps and the storage tanks. Move like your lives depend on it, because they just might." The first task was to stabilize the borehole to prevent a collapse as they began extracting oil. Dalton's crew quickly got to work, reinforcing the walls of the well with steel casing pipes. Each section was carefully lowered into the hole. The pipes would line the borehole, ensuring that the walls wouldn't cave in under pressure or allow groundwater to seep in and contaminate the crude. "Careful with those joints," Dalton shouted. "If we don't seal them properly, we'll end up with leaks." Matthew watched closely. The steel casings were secured with thick iron couplings, and a layer of cement was pumped around the outside to seal the casing in place. This would prevent any blowouts or gas leaks as they increased the pressure during extraction. The next step was to install the pump jack, the heart of their operation. The pump jack, also known as a nodding donkey, would use a counterweight system driven by the steam engine to create a continuous up and down motion. This would force the oil up through the casing pipe and into a collection tank. "Jennings, get that steam engine fired up," Dalton called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "We need steady pressure to get this oil flowing." Jennings and a few other men began shoveling coal into the furnace of the steam engine. Thick black smoke billowed into the sky as the engine roared to life, the pistons chugging rhythmically. The men connected the engine to the pump jack with a series of belts and gears, ensuring that the movement would be smooth and consistent. As the pump jack began its slow, rhythmic motion, the first drops of crude oil started to rise to the surface. The dark liquid flowed through a network of steel pipes, leading to a series of large wooden barrels rigged together to act as makeshift separator tanks. Matthew had insisted on setting up a rudimentary oil-water separator to ensure they collected only pure crude. The crude oil coming out of the ground was mixed with water, gas, and sediment to separate the usable oil from the waste. They needed to let the mixture settle. The tanks were designed with an inlet at the top and a series of valves at the bottom. As the heavier water and sediment settled, the oil would rise to the top where it could be siphoned off. "Keep an eye on the pressure gauges," Matthew instructed one of the younger workers. "If the pressure spikes, shut it down immediately. We can't risk a blowout." Dalton's men were now working in shifts, rotating between operating the pump, monitoring the steam engine, and maintaining the mud pump system. As they drilled deeper into the reservoir, the pressure was bound to increase, and they needed to keep the mud density just right to prevent the well from blowing out. "Check the mud viscosity," Dalton yelled to one of his foremen. "If it's too thin, we'll have a blowout on our hands. Adjust the mix if you have to." The foreman quickly adjusted the mud mix, increasing the ratio of bentonite clay to water to ensure the slurry was thick enough to counteract the pressure from below. Matthew watched as the mud pump churned, sending the thick mixture down the borehole to stabilize the walls and keep the drill bit cool. As the oil continued to flow, Matthew realized they would need additional storage quickly. The makeshift barrels they had set up were filling faster than anticipated. They had a limited number of barrels on hand, and it wouldn't be long before they would need to find more. Dalton, Matthew said, turning to his partner, we need to send a wagon into town to get more barrels. If we can't store it, we'll have to cap the well. And we can't afford to stop production now. Dalton nodded, agreed. I'll send a couple of men into town. We'll need more coal for the steam engine too. We're burning through it faster than I expected. Matthew quickly jotted down a list of supplies on a scrap of paper, handing it to one of the men. Make it quick, he instructed, and don't let anyone in town know what we've hit here. I don't want them pestering us for a permit yet. By mid-afternoon, the first barrel was filled with pure crude oil. It was a sight that Matthew would never forget. As he watched the dark liquid flow into the barrel, he felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. This was what he had dreamed of when he set out on this Venturia. Tangible result, proof that his knowledge from his previous world could yield incredible rewards in this one. The men cheered as they sealed the first barrel. The smell of crude oil heavy in the air. Dalton, wiping his hands on a rag, turned to Matthew with a grin. Well, Hesh, you can expect that you are going to be rich soon, Dalton said, clapping him on the shoulder. Matthew chuckled. Good. Once we have filled up enough barrels, you can work on that permit for the continuous production. As for me, I will have to go to the town and use a telephone there and contact Mr. Fitzwilliam. Tell him that I struck oil. Well, my crew will get you there, Dalton offered, and then shouted, Jennings, get the wagon ready and take Mr. Hesh into town. Yes, sir. Jennings shouted back, thank you, Dalton, I will be on my way now. Matthew climbed into the wagon, the rough wooden seat creaking under his weight. Jennings snapped the reins and the horses trotted forward, pulling them away from the bustling camp. An hour later, they arrived at the small town. Matthew wasted no time. Heading straight for the telegraph office, the clerk, a middle-aged man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up as Matthew entered, the tiny bell above the door jingling. I need to send a telegram to Sylvania, Matthew said, pulling out a slip of paper with Fitzwilliam's contact information. Make it urgent. The clerk nodded and quickly began tapping out the message as Matthew dictated. Struck oil in West Tagus. Stop flow is steady. Stop. I won the BT. Stop. See the result for yourself. Stop. Matthew HESH. As the clerk finished sending the telegram, Matthew leaned against the counter. How much for it? It will be 3 florin, the clerk answered. Matthew paid the clerk, sliding the 3 florin bills across the counter with a nod of gratitude. Now it was a matter of waiting for Fitzwilliam's response. Chapter 33. April 12, 1881. Fitzwilliam Estate. The afternoon sun bathed the Fitzwilliam Estate in a soft, golden glow, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns and gardens that surrounded the sprawling manor. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees lining the cobblestone path, creating a serene atmosphere that spoke of wealth and tranquility. Amber Fitzwilliam was in the courtyard, tending to her favorite rose bushes. Dressed in a modest yet elegant gown of pale blue, the fabric hugged her form in just the right places, accentuating her natural grace and beauty. The dress was simple enough for casual wear, yet refined enough to reflect her family status. Her golden hair was tied back with a silk ribbon, keeping it from her face as she worked. A sudden sound drew her attention, a rhythmic clopping of hooves approaching the estate. Looking up, she saw a postman riding a weathered brown horse, the animal panting lightly from the long ride. The postman was a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, with ruddy cheeks that only reddened further as Amber straightened up and met his gaze. Sliding off the horse with an awkward haste, the postman dusted off his uniform before making his way toward her. He fumbled with his satchel, clearly nervous under the intensity of her gaze. Good afternoon, Miss Fitzwilliam, he stammered, tipping his hat as he approached. I've got an urgent telegram for Mr. Fitzwilliam. Amber offered a polite smile, her sapphire eyes twinkling with curiosity. Thank you, you can leave it with me, I'll make sure my father receives it. The young man hesitated, holding the envelope as if it were a precious artifact. A telegram sent directly from West Tagus, he added, almost as if trying to prolong the conversation. His gaze flickered over Amber's figure, but he quickly averted his eyes, his face flushing a deeper shade of red. Amber's smile widened slightly at his awkwardness. Very well, I'll see to it that he gets it promptly, she assured him, holding out her hand with a sheepish nod. The postman finally relinquished the envelope. As Amber's slender fingers brushed against his, he nearly dropped his hat in his haste to bow and take his leave. She watched him mount his horse and ride away, chuckling softly to herself at his flustered demeanor. Inside the manor, Amber turned and made her way into the grand hall, her soft footsteps barely audible against the marble floors. She passed through the richly decorated corridors lined with family portraits and tapestries until she reached her father's study. The door was slightly ajar, allowing a sliver of light to spill into the hallway. Knocking gently, she waited for her father's deep voice to bid her enter before stepping inside. Charles Fitzwilliam, a man in his late 50s with silver-streaked hair and a stern yet thoughtful expression, looked up from his desk, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. "Amber, my dear," he greeted warmly, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" Amber held out the telegram. "A message arrived for you, father. It's from West Tages." Charles' eyes widened with interest. Setting aside the financial reports he had been reviewing, he took the telegram from Amber and quickly unfolded it. His gaze scanned the message, and a slow smile spread across his lips. "Ah, it seems young Hesh has done it," he murmured to himself, more to his daughter's curiosity than to her understanding. "Hesh? You mean Matthew? What is he doing in West Tages?" Amber asked. "Well, I haven't told you before, but Mr. Hesh has made a deal with me. He was asking for 2 million florins for his automobile venture, but I can't simply hand that amount. He offered me a deal where if he struck oil in West Tages, it'll give him the funds he needs." What is the significance of West Tages in his automobile venture?" Amber asked again, visibly confused. "The automobile that he invented used fuel to run, and the source of that fuel is no other than oil. He intended to create his own supply of oil for his automobile, resulting in a large amount of investment needed, and to establish different enterprises related to automobile production," Charles explained. "Why didn't you say this to me earlier? And when was that deal?" "It's about almost 20 days, and this doesn't concern you, Amber. My concern to you is if you had made efforts to get along with Edward Rochester, have you yielded any result? You know, one day both of you have to marry for the partnership of our family, right?" Amber's expression immediately hardened at the mention of Edward Rochester. She stood straighter, her hands clenched at her sides, the delicate fabric of her gown rustling faintly with the motion. "I don't see how that concerns me, father," she said. Her voice clipped and cold. "My future should not be reduced to a mere business transaction." Charles Fitzwilliam let out a heavy sigh, removing his reading glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Amber, this is not just about you," he said, his tone patient but firm. "This is about securing our family's future. You know the influence the Rochesters wield? With their support, we can achieve so much more: control markets, push for favorable laws, expand beyond what we ever thought possible." Amber shook her head, frustration boiling just beneath the surface. "The Rochesters may hold the keys to power, but I have no desire to be tied to Edward," she retorted. "He is nothing more than a tool in his father's political machine. A puppet with no mind of his own, and I certainly have no intention of spending my life shackled to a man chosen for me by circumstances beyond my control." Charles' eyes narrowed, his usually composed demeanor cracking slightly. "He is the son of the current president of our nation, and he will soon follow his steps." "Father, I don't care if he's the son of the president or the emperor of the world," Amber shot back, her voice rising slightly despite her effort to keep it calm. "I refuse to have my future dictated by your business alliances. I will not marry Edward Rochester just because it's convenient for you." "Shut up," Charles' voice erupted. Amber jolted in her place, shocked by a sudden outburst of his father. "I am your father, you will follow me." Charles allowed himself to calm a little and then spoke. "I am doing this for your future, Amber. One day, you will have to live on your own, and it must be with a man that can give you whatever you want." Tears trickled down on Amber's cheek as she was hurt by her father's loud voice. She couldn't bear herself to be in the same place as him, so she left his office and made her way to her bedroom. Chapter 34. A week later, in the West Tages, the rhythmic clatter of the train wheels on the iron tracks was a soothing sound to Charles Fitzwilliam. It allowed him a momentary distraction from the turmoil that had been brewing back at home. The compartment was comfortably appointed, with plush seats and polished wooden panels, a testament to his status. Yet, despite the luxuries surrounding him, Charles could find no peace. He leaned back against the seat, staring blankly out of the window as the barren landscape of West Tages rolled by. The argument with Amber weighed heavily on his mind. The memory of her tear-streaked face and the defiance in her eyes haunted him. Even now, she had locked herself away, refusing to speak to him for the past week. He had hoped that with time, she would see reason, understand that everything he was doing was for her future. But she had grown more stubborn with each passing day, leaving him no choice but to focus on business for now. The train gave a jolt as it began to slow, pulling into the small, makeshift station at West Tagus. As the train came to a halt, Charles straightened his jacket and adjusted his hat. He was eager to see the fruits of Matthew's labor exiting the train. He was greeted by the harsh midday sun and the dry, biting wind that seemed to carry the scent of oil in the air. A familiar figure stood waiting for him by the platform. Matthew Hesh, looking every bit the industrious entrepreneur in his rugged work clothes, smeared with oil and dust. He looked worn but triumphant, the lines on his face etched deeper from weeks of hard labor. "Mr. Fitzwilliam," Matthew called, stepping forward with a wide smile, his hand outstretched. "I'm glad you could make it. We've struck more than just oil, we've hit a steady flow." "Mr. Hesh," Charles said coolly, raising an eyebrow. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but perhaps you should wash up before we exchange formalities." Matthew's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly nodded in understanding. "Of course, Mr. Fitzwilliam, forgive me, it's been a hectic few days," he said, wiping his hands on a rag that was tucked into his belt. "Well, the wagon will take us to the camp. I'll be 4 hours from here." Matthew gestured toward the waiting wagon, where Jennings was already stationed, holding the reins. The horses, sturdy and dust-covered, pawed at the ground impatiently. Charles nodded curtly and climbed up into the wagon. Matthew followed. Settling into the seat beside him, Jennings gave the horses a gentle flick of the reins, and they set off, the wagon lurching forward with a jolt that sent dust billowing into the air. As they began the long journey toward the oil camp, the landscape stretched out before them, a seemingly endless expanse of arid plains, dotted with sparse vegetation and the occasional tumbleweed skittering across their path. The sun beat down mercilessly, casting shimmering heat waves that blurred the distant horizon. Charles adjusted his hat to shield his face, his eyes squinting against the brightness. "For hours, you said?" Charles asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "That's too far from the town." "Well, once we get your money, we will be able to build a train track which will connect the town to the site." Matthew grinned. Charles Fitzwilliam raised an eyebrow at Matthew's bold declaration. "A train track, you say?" Matthew nodded confidently. "Indeed, sir, but with a steady flow of crude and the right backing, it's entirely possible. Transporting barrels by wagon is inefficient. If we can lay down tracks, we'll be able to move the oil to the refineries much faster and at a fraction of the cost." Charles chuckled as he was intrigued by the determination of the young boy. His entrepreneurial spirit is so strong in him. If he had a son, he would like to be like Matthew. 4 hours later. "We have arrived," Matthew announced as the wagon creaked to a halt. The camp before them was a hive of activity, with men bustling around, steam engines hissing, and the steady clank of metal against metal resonating through the dry air. Charles Fitzwilliam climbed down from the wagon, adjusting his hat to shield his eyes from the relentless sun. "This way, Mr. Fitzwilliam," Matthew gestured, leading him toward the heart of the drilling operation. As they walked, Charles couldn't help but notice the organized chaos around him. Workers, their shirts stained with oil and grime, moved with a sense of urgency. Crates of supplies were being unloaded, and wooden barrels filled with crude oil were being sealed and rolled toward a staging area. It was clear that Matthew's camp was running at full throttle. "The past week has been hectic," Matthew explained. "Once we struck the main reservoir, we've been working non-stop to extract as much crude as possible, but we can only extract in a limited capacity. If we want to dig more, we'll have to build infrastructure for mass extraction." He led Charles deeper into the camp, weaving between stacks of wooden crates filled with tools and barrels ready to be shipped. "I see," Charles said, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the drilling rigs in the distance. "You've done well with the resources you have, but it's clear you've hit your limits. Without a proper setup, you'll only be scratching the surface. Which is why we have to discuss the bet we made. 2 million florins, Matthew said. "We need that money, Mr. Fitzwilliam." "Very well. Let's discuss it on your office if you have one here." "Charles, oh, I have one," Matthew chuckled, gesturing toward a modest wooden structure near the edge of the camp. "It's not much, but it serves its purpose." Charles followed Matthew. They approached Matthew's makeshift office. He pushed open the wooden door, revealing a small but tidy space. A sturdy desk made from reclaimed wood dominated the room, its surface cluttered with maps, geological surveys, and drilling logs. A single oil lamp hung from a hook on the wall, casting a warm, flickering light that pushed back the shadows. "Please, Have a seat, Mr. Fitzwilliam, Matthew offered. Gesturing to a chair opposite his desk, Charles took the seat. Adjusting his suit jacket as he settled in, Matthew sat down behind his desk, leaning forward with an eager, almost restless energy. So, Charles began, steepling his fingers. I am a man of my word, and since you accomplished the end of your bargain, I will grant you the 2 million florin that you are asking for me. Since this is also an investment, I want to discuss my stake here. I'll give you 20% stake. Matthew leaned back slightly, watching Charles' reaction as he offered the stake. 20%, you say? Charles echoed, his tone contemplative. That's a generous offer, Mr. Hesh, but considering the level of risk I'm taking and the substantial amount I'm investing, I believe 30% would be more appropriate. Matthew tried to hide the tension that flickered across his face. He had expected Charles to negotiate, but he hadn't anticipated such a steep counteroffer. He knew he needed the funding, but giving away too much of his company could jeopardize his long-term vision. 30% is quite a chunk, Matthew said carefully, choosing his words. Mr. Fitzwilliam, with all due respect, I understand your position, but I've built this operation from the ground up. I've put in the sweat and labor to make this a reality. 20% ensures that you're rewarded handsomely without me losing control over the direction of the company. Charles leaned forward, the corners of his mouth curling into a shrewd smile. You're a sharp negotiator, Hesh. I'll give you that. But consider the Izumi investment isn't just about the money. With my influence and connections, I can open doors you didn't even know existed. I can secure contracts, expedite permits, and ensure that your future ventures face no bureaucratic hurdles. That kind of leverage is worth far more than just florins. Matthew took a deep breath, considering his options. He couldn't deny that Charles' backing could accelerate his plans exponentially. The Fitzwilliam name carried weight, and with it, he could bypass years of red tape and obstacles. But he also had to weigh his own ambition. She couldn't afford to give away too much control. 25%, Matthew finally offered. That's my final offer. It's a significant share, Mr. Fitzwilliam, and it acknowledges both your financial investment and your strategic value to this project. But it also leaves me with enough control to steer this company where it needs to go. Charles sat back, tapping his fingers on the armrest thoughtfully. Very well, Hesh, he said, extending his hand. 25% it is. I'll have my lawyers draft the paperwork and you'll have the funds within the week. Thank you, Mr. Fitzwilliam, you won't regret this. Chapter 35. The next morning, April 15, 1881, West Tagus, the sun had barely risen, casting a pale light over the dusty camp. The workers were already up, moving with practiced efficiency as they manned the rigs and checked the pumps. The steady hum of activity filled the air, broken only by the occasional barked orders from Dalton. Matthew stood near the main drilling site, his eyes scanning the operation one last time before he had to leave. Dalton, wiping sweat from his brow, approached him. All set. Here, Mr. Hesh, Dalton said. I'll keep everything running smooth while you're gone. Matthew nodded. Good, keep the pressure steady on the main rig and don't push too hard on well 2. Dalton gave a quick, firm nod. Understood, I'll take care of it. You focus on sealing the deal in the city. Matthew turned, spotting Charles Fitzwilliam stepping out of the modest bunkhouse where he had spent the night. The older man adjusted his hat, looking somewhat out of place amidst the grime and chaos of the oil camp. Ready to head back? Charles asked. Yes, sir, Matthew replied. I've left everything in Dalton's hands. We can trust him to keep the crude flowing. Charles gave a satisfied nod. Good, the sooner we get those contracts in order, the better. Matthew gestured toward the waiting wagon where Jennings held the reins, ready for the journey back. Let's not waste any more time, Matthew said, climbing up onto the wagon. Charles joined him, settling into his seat with a slight grunt. Jennings flicked the reins, and the wagon lurched forward, leaving the camp behind. The wagon bounced along the uneven dirt road, the sun climbing higher in the sky as they made their way back to the town. 4 hours later, the town's weathered wooden buildings came into view, the dust from the wagon wheels rising behind them like a thin plume of smoke. Jennings brought the wagon to a stop in front of the railway station where Matthew and Charles climbed down. Thank you, Jennings. You can return now, Matthew said. Safe travels, Mr. Hesh. Mr. Fitzwilliam. Jennings tipped the tip and turned the wagon around. Matthew and Charles Fitzwilliam stood on the wooden platform of the small railway station. They bought the tickets from the ticket booth bound to Sylvania, and after that, they waited for the train. The distant whistle of the approaching train echoed through the air. Matthew and Charles, tickets in hand, made their way toward the platform where a stream of steam billowed from the waiting locomotive. The moment it arrived, they boarded the train and handed their tickets to the conductor, who nodded and motioned them toward the first-class compartment. Settling into their seats, Matthew couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The past few weeks had been exhausting, and though the real work was just beginning, he was eager to move forward. He glanced over at Charles, who had already pulled out a small leather notebook and was jotting down notes. "Mr. Fitzwilliam, once we arrive in Sylvania, how quickly can we move forward with the contracts?" Matthew asked. Charles looked up, adjusting his reading glasses. "I've already sent word to my legal team before I came here. They'll have the paperwork ready for us to review as soon as we arrive. If all goes smoothly, we can finalize everything within a day or two." "You already informed your lawyers about it without even seeing the site first?" Matthew exclaimed softly. "You are not the type of man who would deceive me, right?" Charles looked him in the eye. "The moment I read the report, I knew I had to hold up the end of my bargain." "That's so nice of you," Matthew smiled. "Anyways, where is Amber? I was hoping I'd see her here." "She is in the house," Charles replied, though there was a tinge of sadness in his tone. "Something happened?" Matthew asked. "Nothing, just focus on business." "Okay, if you say so." The journey back to Sylvania was long and arduous. For 50 hours, the train rattled along the tracks, cutting through the barren landscapes of West Tagus, crossing wide rivers, and finally pushing through the dense industrial outskirts of the city. Charles Fitzwilliam spent much of the journey poring over documents, making notes, and planning the next steps for their investment. Matthew, on the other hand, stared out the window, his mind racing with plans for the automobile, oil refinery, rubber, steel, and others. He knew that as soon as they arrived in Sylvania, the real work would begin. The train finally pulled into the Grand Sylvania station just as the sun began its descent on the horizon. Matthew and Charles gathered their belongings and stepped off the train. Greeted by the familiar cacophony of city life as they stepped onto the crowded platform, a sleek black carriage was already waiting for them. The Fitzwilliam family crest was emblazoned on the side, and Charles' chauffeur, Andrews, stood at attention, ready to assist. "Welcome back, Mr. Fitzwilliam," Andrews said with a respectful nod, taking Charles' suitcase. "I trust the journey was smooth?" "As smooth as it could be on these rough tracks," Charles replied with a tired smile. "Let's get going, there's much to discuss." Matthew climbed into the carriage after Charles, settling into the plush leather seats. The door clicked shut, and with a crack of the reins, they were off, weaving through the bustling streets of Sylvania. 30 minutes later, the carriage finally came to a stop in front of the sprawling Fitzwilliam estate. Andrews opened the door, helping them out of the carriage. "The lawyers are already here, sir," he informed Charles. "They've been waiting in the study." "Excellent," Charles said. He turned to Matthew. "Let's not waste any more time. The sooner we finalize these agreements, the sooner you can secure your operation." Meanwhile, on one of the windows, Amber was looking out of the window, her eyes fixed on Matthew walking into the mansion, her lips curled into a smile at last as if she had missed him. Charles led him down a long hallway to a spacious study, where a group of men in dark suits were already seated around a large mahogany table. Legal documents were spread out before them, and the air was thick with the scent of cigars that had been produced by lawyers' cigars. "Gentlemen," Charles announced as he entered, "this is Mr. Matthew Hesh." The lawyers nodded politely, their eyes keen with interest as they assessed Matthew. Charles gestured for Matthew to take a seat, and the negotiations began in earnest. For the next few hours, the room was filled with the sound of shuffling papers, the scratch of pens, and the low murmur of voices as terms were discussed, adjusted, and finalized. Finally, as the clock struck 6 o'clock in the evening, the last signature was placed on the contract. Charles leaned back, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. "Congratulations, Mr. Hesh," he said, extending his hand. "You've just secured your future and ours." Matthew shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Fitzwilliam, this is just the beginning." Chapter 36. The dining table was a lavish display of culinary expertise. The manservants, dressed in their crisp uniforms, had meticulously prepared a feast worthy of the Fitzwilliam family's status. Dishes were served on silver platters. There was roasted pheasant glazed with honey and herbs, a platter of buttered asparagus spears, creamy mashed potatoes drizzled with rich gravy, and freshly baked bread that filled the room with its warm scent. In the center of the table, a tureen of velvety pumpkin soup steamed invitingly. For dessert, delicate pastries and fruit tarts awaited, their golden crusts glistening with sugar. Matthew Hesh and Charles Fitzwilliam sat at opposite ends of the long dining table, and Matthew scanned the dishes before him, Just like in his previous world, the display of food doesn't seem to change when you are born in a privileged status. It looked good, but what about the taste? Picking up his silverware, Matthew took a bite of the roasted pheasant. The flavors were rich, the meat tender and succulent, yet his thoughts were elsewhere. His eyes kept drifting toward the empty chair beside Charles. Amber's absence weighed on him, and finally, he couldn't hold back his curiosity any longer. "Mr. Fitzwilliam," Matthew began, lowering his fork. "I couldn't help but notice Amber isn't joining us for dinner tonight. Is she unwell?" Charles paused, his wine glass halfway to his lips. His sharp eyes flicked over to Matthew, assessing him before he replied. "Amber is not in a good condition. But tell me, Mr. Hesh, why are you so concerned about my daughter's whereabouts?" His tone was polite, yet there was an edge to it, a challenge wrapped in civility. Matthew leaned back in his chair, meeting Charles' gaze directly. "I ask because Amber is the reason we're even sitting at this table tonight, sir," he said evenly. "If she hadn't introduced me to you, I doubt would have signed such a significant contract today. I owe her for that. It seems strange not to acknowledge the person who brought us together, and saying that she is not in a good condition. Is she sick?" Charles set his wine glass down with a soft clink, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet dining room. For a moment, he said nothing, simply studying Matthew with those sharp, calculating eyes. Finally, he sighed, his expression softening just slightly. "Amber is not sick in the physical sense," Charles began, choosing his words carefully. "She's been in a state of distress lately ever since, well, let's just say her spirit has been restless." Matthew's brow furrowed in concern. "Restless? Has something happened to her? I would hate to think she's unwell because of anything I did." Charles let out a soft, humorless chuckle. "You overestimate your influence, Mr. Hesh," he said with a faint smirk. "No, Amber's troubles are not of your making, they are personal family matters that I would rather not discuss at the dinner table." Matthew pressed his lips into a thin line, sensing there was more beneath the surface than Charles was willing to reveal. "I see," he said slowly, though he wasn't convinced. "I just hope that whatever it is, she finds peace. She's been nothing but kind and supportive, and I hate to think of her suffering." Charles' expression hardened again, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Amber has always been a headstrong young woman," he said, "and sometimes her idealism blinds her to the realities of the world. I've tried to guide her, to show her the value of practical choices, but she insists on clinging to her fantasies." Matthew caught the subtle bitterness in Charles' tone, and it made his chest tighten. "Perhaps, Mr. Fitzwilliam, she just wants to be heard," Matthew suggested cautiously. "Sometimes, listening can do more good than any amount of guidance." Charles' gaze sharpened, and for a moment Matthew wondered if he had overstepped. But then Charles gave a slow nod, almost as if acknowledging a point made by a worthy adversary. "Perhaps you're right, Mr. Hesh," he said, his tone cooler now. "But let me remind you, Amber is my daughter, and I will decide what is best for her. Your concern, while noted, would be better focused on your own ventures. After all, you have much to accomplish now that you have secured my investment." "I am aware, Mr. Fitzwilliam. But is it possible for me to speak with her briefly? I just want to thank her," Matthew pleaded subtly. He just wanted to see if Amber was doing fine. That's all. Charles contemplated for a moment, as if thinking if it's better to let him see his daughter or not. Seeing that there was no harm in Matthew meeting her, he nodded. "I'll have one of my manservants escort you to her room once you finish eating your meal." Matthew's eyes brightened at Charles' reluctant consent, though he kept his expression composed. "Thank you, Mr. Fitzwilliam," he said with a respectful nod. "I won't take up much of her time." Charles gave a curt nod in return, signaling the end of their conversation on the matter. He resumed eating, focusing on his plate as if nothing had transpired. Matthew forced himself to finish the meal, though his mind was already engaged on what could have happened. Like, what state would Amber be in? The last time he had seen her, she had been the epitome of grace and confidence, always with a quick smile and a sparkle in her eyes. The idea that she was now confined to her room, troubled by matters unknown, unsettled him deeply. As the last course was cleared away, Charles dabbed at his lips with a linen napkin, then motioned to one of the waiting manservants. "Jeffries," he called sharply, "escort Mr. Hesh to Amber's quarters." Jeffries, a tall, stern man in his mid-40s, gave a quick bow. "Right away, sir." Matthew stood, inclining his head toward Charles in gratitude. "Thank you again, Mr. Fitzwilliam. I promise I won't disturb her for long." Charles merely waved him off, his attention already returning to the papers that had been discreetly brought in by another servant. With that, Matthew followed Jeffries out of the dining hall after what felt like an eternity. They reached a heavy oak door at the end of a quiet hallway. Jeffries paused and turned to Matthew. "Miss Fitzwilliam's room," the servant announced in a low voice. "Knock lightly. If she chooses not to answer, it would be best to leave her be." "Understood," Matthew replied, giving the man a nod. "Thank you." As Jeffries retreated, Matthew took a deep breath, steeling himself. He raised his hand and knocked gently on the door. For a moment, there was no response, and Matthew's heart sank, but then, a faint voice came from the other side. "Who is it?" Amber's voice was soft, almost hesitant. "It's Matthew," he called back, leaning closer to the door. "May I come in?" There was a pause, long enough that Matthew wondered if she would turn him away, but finally the door creaked open a fraction, revealing Amber's tired, yet still beautiful, face. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her usual vibrancy seemed dulled. "Matthew," she said softly, stepping back to allow him entry. "I wasn't expecting you." "I just wanted to check on you," Matthew said, his voice gentle as he entered the room. "You were nowhere to be seen, so I was worried." Amber closed the door behind him and leaned against it, crossing her arms as if to protect herself from whatever words he might say. Chapter 37. Matthew stepped closer, but kept a respectful distance, not wanting to crowd her. "I know your father mentioned you were going through something. I just wanted you to know that if you need someone to talk to, I'm here." Amber's eyes welled up and she quickly looked away, dabbing at the corner of her eye with a handkerchief. "It's nothing," she said, though the crack in her voice betrayed her. "Just family matters." "Amber," Matthew said softly, his tone urging her to trust him, "you've been nothing but kind to me, and I wouldn't be where I am now without your help. The least I can do is listen." For a moment, it seemed like she might refuse, but then, with a weary sigh, Amber sank into the armchair by the window, gesturing for Matthew to take a seat across from her. "It's just, my father," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's trying to control everything in my life, who I marry, what I do. It's suffocating, Matthew. I'm tired of living according to his plans." Matthew nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. He had suspected there was more to Amber's distress than Charles had let on, but hearing it from her directly made his chest tighten with empathy. In this time period, women, especially those who were daughters of wealthy and influential families, were often seen as strategic assets. Marriages were rarely about love or personal compatibility. Instead, they were meticulously planned arrangements designed to strengthen alliances between powerful families, consolidate wealth, and secure political influence. For families like the Fitzwilliams, marrying off a daughter to another influential family wasn't just a matter of tradition, it was a calculated business move. The daughter's feelings, desires, or dreams were secondary. If considered at all, the primary concern was how the union could benefit the family's fortunes and extend their reach into new circles of power. This oppressive reality was the invisible cage that trapped many women of her status. Despite their wealth and privilege, they had little control over their own lives. They were expected to be perfect daughters, perfect wives, and perfect hostesses, all while sacrificing their own dreams to fulfill their family's ambitions. "I see, so that was the case about why Mr. Fitzwilliam was off," Matthew noted, walking over to her bed and then taking his seat on the edge of it. "Why don't you take a seat and hear what I have to say?" Amber hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting to the space next to Matthew on the bed. There was a brief flicker of something in her gaze, perhaps a fear of being seen too close to someone her father might not approve of, but eventually she let out a soft sigh. As if resigning herself to this moment of reprieve, slowly she walked over and sat beside Matthew, the mattress dipping slightly under her weight. She folded her hands in her lap, staring down at them as if they held the answers to her turmoil. Matthew turned to face her. "Amber, I can't pretend to know exactly what you're feeling, but I've seen enough to know that you're struggling under a weight you never asked to carry. You've been forced into a role that doesn't fit you. I can't imagine what it's like to have your life planned out by others, to be used as a piece on a chessboard. You deserve more than just being a means to an end for someone else's ambitions." Amber's breath hitched slightly and she turned to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But what choice do I have, Matthew? I can't just walk away from my family. They would disown me, cut me off completely, and I don't want to disappoint my father, even if he doesn't understand. I understand that walking away might seem impossible. I know it would mean giving up everything you've ever known, but ask yourself, is the life your father has planned for you truly the life you want to live? Would it make you happy?" Amber bit her lip, her gaze dropping to her hands again. She didn't answer immediately, but the silence that followed was telling. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know. I've never been allowed to think about what I really want." It's always been about what's best for the family, for my father's ambitions. Matthew nodded, a thoughtful look in his eyes. That's the trap they've set for you. It's easy to think that you owe them everything, that you're bound to follow their wishes simply because they've provided for you, but at some point, Amber, you have to live for yourself, otherwise, you'll spend your entire life chasing someone else's dreams. Amber's shoulders trembled slightly and she turned to look out the window, blinking rapidly as if trying to push back tears. But what happens if I defy him? If I refuse to marry the man he's chosen for me, he'll have nothing, no money, no support. He'll be cast out. Matthew's expression softened and he reached out to place a reassuring hand on hers. I won't pretend it would be easy, he admitted, but I can promise you this: you wouldn't be alone. If you ever decided to break free, to live your own life, I would help you. I wouldn't let you fall. Amber looked up at him, her eyes widening in surprise. You would do that for me? Well, you gave me a huge opportunity, Amber. If it isn't for you, I wouldn't be having all the funds that I will need to kickstart my business enterprises. You are not just taking advantage of me, right? So I can be with you or anything. Amber eyed him suspiciously and Matthew found it endearing because her facial expression was cute. No, Amber, it's nothing like that, he said softly. I would never take advantage of your situation just to get something out of you. I owe you more than just gratitude for introducing me to your father. I genuinely want to see you happy, not trapped in a life that suffocates you. Amber's gaze softened, but the doubt in her eyes didn't completely fade. I'm sorry, she whispered. It's just, I don't know who to trust anymore. Everyone around me always has some agenda, some hidden motive. Matthew nodded, understanding the walls she had built around herself. I get it, he replied. You've grown up surrounded by people who see you as a means to an end, but Amber, I'm not like that. You've seen what I'm trying to build: me business, my dreams. I have my own ambitions. I just don't want to see you lose yourself trying to fulfill someone else's. Amber looked down at their hands, his still resting gently on hers. For a moment, she simply stared, as if trying to decide if she could believe him. Then, slowly, she intertwined her fingers with his. Matthew, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. I want to believe you. I really do. But I'm scared of what it means to defy my father. Scared of what would happen if I chose to follow my own path. I've never been allowed to do that. Matthew squeezed her hand gently. I know it's scary, but sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that lead us to where we truly belong. You're not alone in this, Amber. And if you ever decide to take that step, they'll be here to help you, no matter what your father or anyone else thinks. Amber blinked back tears, her shoulders trembling as she struggled to hold herself together. I just need some time to think, she murmured. Take all the time you need, Matthew assured her. I'm not going anywhere. Just remember, Amber, you deserve to be happy. Not just for your father's sake, or for anyone else's, but for yourself. Amber nodded slowly, finally allowing herself a small, hesitant smile. Thank you, Matthew. Well, it's about time that I take my leave, Matthew said as he rose to his feet. You will be just fine, Amber. If you need anything, you know where to find me. Matthew, you seem to have forgotten something, Amber said, her eyes finally twinkling teasingly. What is it? You really forgot about it. Humph. Amber pouted as she averted her gaze. Oh, I think I know what you are referring to. Don't worry. They'll be back. And once I do, I want you to be your best version of yourself. Amber smiled. I will. Chapter 38. A day later, in Matthew's factory, the workers of his automobiles project were standing in front of a makeshift platform, waiting for an announcement Matthew will make. In their minds, they were contemplating on what Matthew would say to them. Is it going to be a new prototype? Addressing concerns? Or worse, ending the project and leaving all of them jobless? The workers wanted answers. Matthew stood on the makeshift platform in front of his gathered workers. The factory floor was filled with a quiet buzz of curiosity and anxiety as everyone waited for him to speak. The murmur of voices died down as he raised his hand, signaling for their attention. Thank you all for gathering here. Matthew began. I know you've been wondering about the future of our project, and today, I'm here to put your minds at ease. He paused, letting his words sink in, noticing the flicker of relief among the workers. I'm proud to announce that, thanks to the success of our automobile project, we've secured significant investments. With this, we will be able to realize our dreams of revolutionizing the mode of transportation. There were murmurs of excitement from the crowd. Some exchanged hopeful glances, while others nodded, clearly relieved that their jobs were secure. But there's more, Matthew continued. To truly reach our goals, we're going to have to expand beyond this factory. However, that doesn't mean we're leaving here just yet. For now, we'll keep operations running here as usual, but I've already secured a plot of land suitable for a brand new manufacturing facility complex. Matthew saw the workers lean in, hanging on to his every word. In this new facility, we won't just focus on automobiles. We'll be manufacturing trucks, motorcycles, pickup trucks, coupes, and more. This expansion will allow us to innovate and diversify our production lines, making us a leader in the industry. But that's not all. This new complex isn't just for work. I want you and your families to be part of this journey. That's why the new site will include housing, schools, and other amenities. You won't have to be separated from your loved ones. You'll be able to live, work, and grow together, all in one place. The announcement brought a louder cheer from the crowd. For many of them, the idea of having their families close while working was a dream they had never imagined. Construction will begin in the first month of May, Matthew explained. I expect it to take between 6 months to a year, depending on the speed and dedication of the construction workers. Until then, we'll continue working right here, improving our designs and preparing for the big move. Matthew paused, looking around at the eager faces before him. I want to thank each and every one of you for your hard work, your dedication, and your belief in this project. Without you, none of this would have been possible. He took a step back from the platform, giving a final nod. Let's make this dream a reality. Thank you. As he stepped down, the workers erupted in applause. He went back to his office where he began planning for the future of his company. First off, the company itself. He leaned back, rubbing his temples as he thought about the best way forward. It was clear to him that running multiple enterprises under separate entities would become chaotic to scale efficiently. He needed to centralize everything under a single organization corporation. The idea struck him like a bolt of lightning. Corporation. That would be the best way to control the various enterprises he was planning to start. By creating a parent corporation, he could manage the different industries under one umbrella, streamline operations, and attract more investors by showing them a unified, strategic vision. Matthew pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began jotting down notes. Name of the corporation: Hesh Industries Corporation. Structure: the corporation would have several subsidiaries, each dedicated to a specific sector. Hesh Motors for the production of automobiles, trucks, motorcycles, and more. Hesh Oil Gas for the extraction, refining, and distribution of fuel. Hesh Steelworks to supply the high-quality steel needed for manufacturing vehicles. Hesh Rubber Tire to produce tires for the expanding automobile lines. Hesh Housing Construction to manage the development of the new manufacturing complex and employee housing. Board of Directors. Matthew would act as the CEO of the company while Charles Fitzwilliam would act as the chairman of the board, as he is the angel investor of his company. Capital allocation. The funds he secured from Charles Fitzwilliam would be allocated across the various subsidiaries to jumpstart operations. Hesh Motors: 500,000 florins. Hesh Oil Gas: 500,000 florins. Hesh Steelworks: 700,000 florins. Hesh Rubber Tire: 300,000 florins. With all that settled, you might have some questions as to why the Hesh Motors only get 500,000 florin, the same as Hesh Oil Gas, while the Hesh Steelworks get 200,000 more than those two. The reason is simple: all of the enterprises that he was going to start are all lucrative in the future. Oil would become one of the most important resources in the world, while steel will help the country or foreign country industrialize even further, meaning they are essential for developments and would yield a significant amount of profit to him. Not to mention the fact that he knew where the largest iron ore deposits in the country were. In the United States, that would be in the Mesabi Range in Minnesota, where vast reserves of iron ore lay waiting to be extracted. By investing heavily in steel production, Matthew could secure a crucial supply line not just for his automobile venture, but also for construction projects, infrastructure, and even future military contracts if the geopolitical situation required it. With these strategic advantages, Matthew was positioning Hesh Industries Corporation to become an industrial powerhouse. He knew that controlling the supply chain, from raw materials to finished products, would be the key to maintaining a competitive edge. By integrating vertically, he could reduce costs, streamline production, and ensure quality across all his enterprises. Speaking of raw materials, rubber would have to be sourced from overseas, especially from a parallel country of Thailand, since the plan involves foreign countries. This might be the perfect chance for him to study what country exists beyond the borders of the Grand Republic of Emirathia. Chapter 39. Ever since coming into this world, Matthew hadn't known about foreign countries as he was busy with his prototype and the dreams that he'd want to turn into reality. Now he had his chance because he had thought about it. He purchased a world map from a nearby bookstore and brought it with him in his office where he carefully unfurled the map. Matthew's gaze traveled across the sprawling map laid out before him. The crisp paper crackled slightly as he smoothed it out on his desk. His fingers tracing the borders of familiar yet altered lands, he couldn't help but marvel at how this world, though similar to his own, diverged in fascinating ways. The Grand Republic of Emirathian borders were strikingly similar to the United States he remembered from his previous life. The coastline, the vast stretch of land from the east to the west, all mirrored the America he once knew save for the absence of Hawaii. There was no indication of islands in the Pacific under Emirathia's control. It seemed their ambitions had remained focused on the mainland. To the north, where Canada should have been, there lay the Kingdom of Atoa. The name was unfamiliar, but the contours of the land were almost identical. The presence of a monarchy was intriguing, especially since he had expected a federation like the Canada of his world. From what Matthew could infer, the Kingdom of Atoa might have emerged after a successful revolution against its colonial rulers, possibly the British or French. However, the lack of concrete details made it clear that he'd need to gather more information before making any assumptions about their political structure or foreign policies. His eyes drifted southward, and he noted the nation. Labeled United States of Mexico, the name suggested a twist in history, perhaps a more unified republic or federation than the Mexico he once knew. What caused this divergence? He had no idea, but it was clear that this Mexico had maintained its independence and perhaps even grown more powerful. As for the current relations between the Grand Republic of Emirathia and its neighbors to the north and south, Matthew was operating in the dark. He made a mental note to look into diplomatic reports or find contacts who could give him insights into the geopolitical dynamics of the region. Turning his attention to the Old World, Matthew's eyes swept across Europe. The borders were strikingly similar to the pre-World War I map he remembered. The Austro-Hungarian Empire still sprawled across Central Europe, Germany remained a unified empire, and the Ottoman Empire retained its grip on southeastern Europe. Yet, despite the familiar borders, he couldn't be certain if the same historical events had led to their formation. Were these nations locked in the same rivalries? Did they possess the same ambitions? Only time would tell. However, it was Asia that truly captivated his attention. Unlike in his previous world, where European powers had carved up the continent, leaving it riddled with colonies and spheres of influence, this world seemed to have taken a different path. The major powers India, China, Japan, and Korea appeared to be independent, their borders free of foreign control. There were no signs of the British Raj dominating India, nor did there seem to be European concessions dotting the coastlines of China. Even Southeast Asia, which had been a battleground for colonial interests, appeared largely autonomous. What had caused this shift? Matthew wondered. Perhaps in this world, the Asian powers had managed to resist colonial encroachment, uniting earlier or leveraging their resources to fend off European imperialism, or maybe a different series of events had unfolded, leading to a world where these nations had maintained their sovereignty. Matthew leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers thoughtfully on the desk. This revelation opened up new possibilities and new risks. If the Asian nations were truly independent and not weakened by colonial rule, they could be formidable competitors or potential allies. Trade routes, resources, and alliances in this world would not follow the patterns he was familiar with. He needed more information, reliable contacts, and perhaps even a diplomatic mission to these nations to understand their intentions and potential. But one thing was clear: if he wanted Hesh Industries Corporation to grow beyond Emirathia, understanding the global landscape was crucial. For now, however, he would focus on gathering intelligence. He needed maps, books, reports, anything that could shed light on this world's geopolitical history. He would reach out to scholars, diplomats, and anyone who could provide insights into these foreign lands. Without wasting any time, Matthew decided that he needed answers, and the best place to find them would be the town's largest library. Grabbing his coat and hat, he made his way through the bustling streets of Sylvania. The library was a grand building, its stone facade weathered but still imposing. He hurried up the steps and pushed through the heavy wooden doors, the scent of old books and polished wood welcoming him. The librarian gave him a curious look as he approached the front desk. But he simply nodded politely before making his way to the history section. Matthew spent hours poring over dusty volumes, maps, and historical texts. He filled pages of his notebook with observations, piecing together the puzzle of this world's history. The deeper he dug, the more he realized just how different yet intriguingly similar this world was to his own, and this is what he discovered. In this world, Canada never fully united under British rule. Instead, after a series of conflicts in the early 1800s, the region that should have been Canada fractured into several territories. The French-speaking territories in the east united to form the Kingdom of Ottawa, a constitutional monarchy that declared independence after a successful revolution against British colonial forces in the mid-19th century. The British, distracted by other colonial conflicts and a brewing war in Europe, reluctantly accepted Ottawa's sovereignty to avoid further losses. Ottawa's strategic use of alliances with native tribes and their adaptation of European military tactics allowed them to resist colonial control more effectively than in Matthew's original world. Today, Ottawa maintains a cautious but cordial relationship with its southern neighbor, the Grand Republic of Emirathia, with both nations vying for influence over trade routes and natural resources. The United States of Mexico was born out of the ashes of multiple failed attempts by Spain to reconquer its former colony. After the Mexican War of Independence, rather than becoming a centralized republic, Mexico adopted a federal system similar to Emirathia, with strong states united under a weaker central government. However, unlike the Mexico Matthew knew, this version had managed to avoid civil war and territorial loss. Key to this stability was an alliance with indigenous leaders and the establishment of a powerful navy that deterred American and European encroachments. The country is now a formidable regional power with a focus on industrializing its economy while maintaining strong ties to other Latin American nations. The relationship between Emirathia and Mexico is tense but stable, with occasional disputes over border territories and trade policies. Europe remained largely unchanged from what Matthew remembered of the pre-World War I era, but with some intriguing twists. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was still intact, though there were rumblings of discontent from various ethnic groups seeking autonomy. The German Empire was a powerful industrial force, having unified earlier under the leadership of a charismatic Kaiser who focused on diplomatic ties with the Ottomans to secure oil supplies from the Middle East. What caught Matthew's eye, however, was the survival of the Ottoman Empire. Instead of being the sick man of Europe, the Ottomans had modernized their military and administration with the help of German advisors. This had allowed them to maintain control over key territories in the Balkans and the Middle East. Matthew wondered if the stronger Ottoman presence would lead to a different outcome in global politics. The most significant divergence lay in Asia. In this world, India had successfully resisted British colonization after a series of rebellions in the 1850s. The country was unified under a loose confederation of princely states that maintained their independence while coordinating on matters of trade and defense. This had allowed India to modernize and become a formidable power in its own right. Free from European dominance, China, meanwhile, had avoided the century of humiliation thanks to the early rise of reformist leaders who strengthened the Qing dynasty's military and opened limited trade with foreign powers on their own terms. Japan had still undergone its Meiji Restoration but had done so without external pressure, making it an even more cohesive and disciplined society. The most surprising discovery was Korea, which in this world had managed to fend off both Chinese and Japanese influences. It had modernized its army and established a strong navy, becoming a powerful regional player in East Asia. Southeast Asia was a patchwork of independent kingdoms that had managed to resist colonial rule by playing European powers against each other. Africa was still largely colonized by European powers, but there were signs that this world's colonial ventures had not gone as smoothly. Native resistance had been fiercer and more organized, with several regions, most notably Ethiopia and parts of West Africa, maintaining their independence. European powers were stretched thin, facing rising discontent both at home and in their colonies. So to summarize briefly, he was in a world where the Western influences are weak globally. This is going to be problematic as he wouldn't be able to use his white man privilege, which is significant in this era. But one thing is certain, in terms of economy and industry, the Grand Republic of Emirathia is the leading nation of it. That should be enough for him. Chapter 40. After learning the geopolitics of the new world that he was living in, he now knew how to act accordingly. Sooner or later, he would have to open a company abroad for the primary purpose of extracting valuable resources for his automobile company. The Kingdom of Siam is the best bet where he could open that rubber company due to it having the largest rubber-producing country in the world. The reason behind Thailand's dominance in rubber production in his world was rooted in its unique geography and climate. The southern region of the country, with its dense tropical rainforests and abundant rainfall, provided the perfect conditions for rubber trees Hevea brasiliensis to thrive. Unlike the fragmented rubber plantations in other parts of Southeast Asia, Siam's plantations were vast and well-managed, benefiting from fertile volcanic soil that was rich in nutrients. This ensured that the latex harvested was of exceptional quality and yield. Rubber trees in Siam matured faster due to the region's consistent humidity levels and temperatures averaging between 25 Celsius to 32 Celsius. These optimal conditions accelerated the sap production, allowing trees to be tapped more frequently without damaging them. Additionally, the natural resilience of the Hevea brasiliensis species in this environment meant fewer diseases and pests, reducing the need for chemical interventions that could otherwise harm the quality of the latex. If we are talking about numbers, each mature Hevea brasiliensis tree could produce an average of 80 to 100 milliliters of latex sap per tapping session. Given that rubber trees could be tapped up to twice a week without harming their health, a single tree could yield approximately 8 to 10 liters of latex per year. Now, with vast plantations containing 10,000 trees per hectare and a well-managed estate of around 1,000 hectares, Matthew calculated that his planned plantations could potentially produce around 100 million liters per year raw latex needed to be processed and refined to convert it into usable rubber. Typically, 1 liter of raw latex could produce about 250 grams of solid rubber after processing, depending on the purity and water content of the sap. This meant that 100 million liters of latex could produce 25,000 metric tons of solid rubber annually. On average, it took about 7 kilograms of processed rubber to manufacture one car tire. With the projected yield from his rubber plantations, he could produce approximately 3.57 million tires annually. This was an impressive figure, and Matthew knew that this was a chance to secure a monopoly of rubber production. April 30, 1881. Matthew rode his automobile as this was becoming a convenient mode of transportation for him. And every time he passed by a group of people or carriages, all eyes were on him as if he was the main character. He was heading to Fitzwilliam Estate to inform him of his plan on going to the Kingdom of Siam in Southeast Asia and opening a rubber plantation there. The gates could be seen from afar, and he pressed the accelerator, feeling the engine roar beneath him as the automobile surged forward. The wind whipped through his hair, and the gravel road leading to the Fitzwilliam Estate flew by. In a blur, moments later, he arrived at Fitzwilliam Estate. The guards stationed at the entrance quickly took notice of the unexpected arrival. They exchanged glances, clearly recognizing the young inventor who had made a name for himself as Mr. Fitzwilliam's business partner. One of them stepped forward. "Good day, sir," the guard greeted, tipping his hat respectfully. "What brings you to the Fitzwilliam Estate today?" "I'm here to see Mr. Fitzwilliam," Matthew replied as he rolled down the window. "I have urgent business to discuss with him." The guard hesitated for a moment before clearing his throat. "I'm afraid Mr. Fitzwilliam is currently away on a business trip, sir. He won't be back for a few days." Matthew frowned slightly but quickly composed himself. "I see. Well, in that case, may I speak with Miss Amber Fitzwilliam? I believe she's still here." The guard exchanged a quick glance with his companion before nodding. "Yes, Miss Amber is indeed at home. Given your association with Mr. Fitzwilliam, I see no harm in letting you through. Please proceed, sir." The heavy gates creaked open slowly, allowing Matthew to drive his automobile into the estate grounds. He parked the automobile in front of the main entrance and was escorted by one of the servants working on the estate. They arrived at a room Matthew was not familiar with. It was not to Amber's bedroom but to something else. "This is the lattice hobby room. You may now inform her of your presence by knocking on the door," said the female servant. Matthew did as he was told, knocking on the door and introducing himself. "Amber, this is Matthew." "Matthew?" He could hear a faint exclamation from Amber, followed by a flurry of activity on the other side of the door. It sounded like something being hastily shuffled around, a few clatters, and the distinct sound of something metal dropping to the floor. Matthew's brow furrowed in curiosity as he waited. It seemed as though she was trying to hide or clean something in a hurry. After a few more moments of what sounded like panicked scrambling, the door finally creaked open. Amber stood there, slightly out of breath, her cheeks flushed. The first thing Matthew noticed was the streaks of paint smeared across her face and on the sleeves of her blouse. It was an unusual sight that had never seen her in such a state before. She was usually so meticulously put together where every detail of her appearance was carefully curated. Matthew couldn't help but let out a soft chuckle. "Amber, I believe you've missed a spot," he said, pointing to the streak of bright blue paint running across her cheek. Amber's eyes widened and she quickly dabbed at her face with the back of her hand, only succeeding in smearing the paint further. "Oh, Matthew. Wasn't expecting anyone," she stammered, clearly flustered. Matthew leaned casually against the doorframe, a playful smile tugging at his lips. "I can see that. I had no idea you were an artist." Amber's shoulders relaxed slightly and a shy smile replaced the look of panic on her face. "It's just something I do in my spare time," she admitted, "a way to clear my mind." "Well, may I come in? I'm curious to see what's kept you so busy that you didn't hear my knock," Matthew said, tilting his head to peer past her into the room. Amber hesitated for a moment but then stepped aside to let him in. "I suppose it's only fair, since you did catch me in the act." The room was filled with the scent of turpentine and linseed oil, the signature smells of a painter's studio. Canvases of various sizes were propped up against the walls, some completed while others were still in progress. The centerpiece was an easel set up by the window. Bathed in the warm afternoon light, on it was a large canvas, depicting two birds, one with its head resting sweetly against the other. "Why don't look at it?" Amber's voice came out in a panicked squeak as she rushed forward, her hands flailing in an attempt to block Matthew's view of the canvas. Her cheeks, already flushed, deepened in color, and her fumbling hands only smeared more paint onto her already colorful sleeves. Matthew couldn't suppress his amused grin. "Why not? It looks beautiful already," he teased, leaning to the side to get a better view. "Because it's not done yet," Amber stammered, her hands now hovering awkwardly in front of the painting, unsure whether to cover it or try to wipe the paint from her face. It's just a rough sketch. Not ready for anyone to see." All right, I want look," he said, raising his hands in surrender. "But from what I did see, it's impressive. You've got quite the talent, Amber." Amber dropped her hands to her sides, letting out a relieved sigh. "You're just saying that," she muttered, but there was a small smile tugging at her lips. She turned away quickly, trying to hide her embarrassment, and wiped at her cheek again, only to smear the paint further. Matthew chuckled softly, reaching into his pocket for a handkerchief. "Here, let me help," he offered, stepping closer. He gently wiped at the streaks of paint on her face. Amber froze, her breath hitching slightly as their eyes met. For a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them in the softly lit room. "There," Matthew said, stepping back with a satisfied nod. "Much better, though, I must say. The blue does suit you," he added with a teasing grin. Amber's lips quirked up into a shy smile, her eyes flickering to the floor. "Thank you, Matthew, and I'm sorry for the mess. I wasn't expecting any visitors, so I lost track of time." Matthew waved off her apology. "No need to explain. Honestly, it's nice to see you doing something you're passionate about," he said sincerely. "Art seems to bring you joy, and that's worth more than any polished appearance." Amber's eyes softened at his words, her nervous energy fading. "It's one of the few things that's truly mine," she confessed quietly. "A place where I can forget everything else, just for a little while." "I get that," Matthew replied with a gentler tone. "Everyone needs an escape from the world sometimes. For me, it's building things. For you, it's painting." Amber nodded, her expression turning contemplative. "I just wish I had more freedom to pursue it," she admitted. "But, as you know, my father has other plans for me." In order to not let the atmosphere feel pensive, Amber shifted the topic. "So, why are you here?" "I came here to see your father and discuss business, but it seemed that he was not here," Matthew revealed. "My father is in Amsterdam speaking with the inventor of light bulb, Mr. Volta. I was told that they are planning on lighting up the entire country." "I see, with his direct current system," Matthew said. "If only they knew how inefficient and expensive that venture would be." "Oh my, you know about electricity too, Matthew?" "Well, I do," Matthew replied. "Let me ask, is seeing my father urgent to you?" Amber inquired. "You can say that," Matthew answered. "Why do you ask?" Amber grinned and suggested, "Then why don't we head there to Amsterdam and speak with him directly?"